to speak about what we do from a technology perspective, specifically for our banking sector. We had, from our panelists, we had profound overviews. Ms. Sadana, I love the way you presented the problem which a common man faces in a rural area. And as you rightly pointed out, technology can fulfill that gap. And to support that kind of technology, this is something that we at Sanovi are trying to address along with banks and other institutions. We are all aware that risk to business due to outages has been increasing for the last 40 years. These risks are both man-made and natural. Okay. Typical to infrastructure and operational issues, specifically in India, we have a major problem called power outages, vehicular traffic in cities. In times of disaster, would the team be able to reach the disaster recovery site in time? Growing IT infrastructure is shifting focus from DR efficiency. Lack of skilled manpower for managing disaster recovery and natural calamities. Since IT outages pose a huge risk, from a banking perspective, outages impact right from business viability to regulatory requirement to financial performance. In fact, from a changing paradigm perspective, from a traditional human interface-based, relatively slower approaches of doing business, we are moving more and more to fast, modular, quicker, e-enabled services. In this changing paradigm of ITDR, different services from a bank, basically what you need is a disaster recovery strategy which is not only traditional DR but agile and adaptive. It should be able to do a flexible recovery of a service or an application or a complete data center. It should be able to quickly ensure that customer satisfaction is avoided at all costs. It should enhance a bank to maintain good reputation, especially in times of disaster. And it should be a tool which can help the bank to prove compliance to the testing or the SLAs against disaster recovery and business continuity. Typical challenges to agile and adaptive approach to a disaster recovery strategy is, first and foremost, no real-time visibility into recovery point objective. And this is, I believe, more into technology deep dive, but basically recovery point objective is how much data will you lose in case your data center was to go down. And that data will actually is actually the actual revenue loss or record loss for a bank. Okay. Are all the components available from a DR perspective? Testing DR. Key challenges, DR testing is a workflow-based approach which typically takes a lot number of steps which is dependent on resources. And these steps and resources are required to address various components of data center like application, database, operating system, storage, network, things like that. So typically, when you establish a DR, the first thing, it could be a DR from a technology perspective or a fire drill, what you do is a DR drill. And DR drill, the major discouraging factor is it's expensive, it's disruptive, it causes downtime. We have seen operator errors. It's dependent on scripts of some programs that people have written to automate it. Changing application environment, because applications need to adapt to the changing business needs of the organization. So in case the application changes, the DR plan typically tends to get outdated. Reports, you should have a mechanism which gives you reports regarding where you are from a DR readiness, from a DR testing, from a DR SLA perspective. What you need is skilled manpower and assurance of recovery. And another key important piece which is becoming more and more focus area is collaboration during an actual disaster or during a DR drill. Okay. A typical IT DR framework recommends that whenever an application is provisioned in a data center to have a disaster recovery strategy, it needs to be provisioned with best practices for that application from a disaster recovery perspective. It should be monitored to ensure it is meeting the key DR SLAs, which is RP and RTO. It should have alerting mechanism against any environmental changes which are impacting DR. It should have a mechanism to have regular and flexible testing. And last but not the least, an ability to generate reports so that the same can be analyzed and gaps can be found out and fixed from a disaster recovery perspective. Around these challenges, what we have is a Sanovi Disaster Recovery Management Suite. Starting from provisioning an application based on industry best practices workflow, we can do real-time monitoring of the key DR SLAs, also alert against any changes from a DR perspective. What we now is a pre-flight check mechanism to ensure that your DR testing or actual DR procedure will work when required. Out of the box, capability to do DR testing for standard applications and storage boxes, automated application recovery. In case of a disaster in the primary data center, just one click and that service will come at the disaster recovery site without requiring too much of subject matter expert intervention. Last but not the least, compliance and deviation reports. Typically, some of the screenshots that a banking from business perspective may like to see is a list of applications and what's the current RPO that's being maintained. If you see the second column, that's the RPO that you're having in real time. What's the data lag? What's the RTO in terms of number of steps required and the amount of time it will take? What is the DR readiness from that application perspective, and what is the drill state? What was the status for the last drill that's done? Typically, these are served by a bunch of individuals trying to collect data and then crunch out Excel sheet and then providing this feedback. However, with this tool in place, this is something that is visible to any authorized user in a banking industry. It could be an IT or a non-IT user. It could be an application owner who can say, hey, if my application is RTGS, can I see where's my RTGS status from a disaster recovery perspective? How much data I'm losing currently? How much time will it take for me to come up? Am I already by any chance running from disaster recovery side? And was my DR testing done successfully or not? So the things that we do is when you do a DR drill, we provide an evidence of control where step-by-step details of each and every step that was done from a DR drill perspective can be proven, can be shown, can be analyzed. Reports, some of the reports, a summary of all the DR drills that was done, what were the RPO deviation for a specific application over a period of time. What we also have is a workflow-based approach to do a recovery or a test, DR testing. We have a mechanism where this workflow can be executed in a dry run mode to ensure that all the prereqs required to do that recovery or testing are in place. It basically ensures that in times of disaster or a DR testing, you are assured of a recovery or a successful DR test. Okay. What SANOVI provisions is a complete suite to address coverage of all the components within the data center, starting from the application to database to network to operating system to replication storage. SANOVI DRM specifically from banking perspective, RBI has a regulation where banks have to provide BCP testing reports, readiness reports. So we have out-of-the-box reports around that, which is called SANOVI DRM module for banking, where we have banking BCP readiness, BCP test reports, and the test reports in detail, where each and application-wise status of when the test was done, how much time was it taken, and was it successfully tested or not. From a regulation perspective, we allow a bank or any organization to prove to the regulators that they are in sync, they are up to date, they are prepared for any disaster to do a complete recovery. On top of it, we have something called a Business Continuity Manager Planner, which basically is a tool which gives an online collaboration assistance in terms of disaster, where you can define and assign tasks ahead of time. So people get assigned responsibilities in case of a disaster, where they will be called, informed, and invited to participate in any disaster recovery operation. It has a tool to do online chat, and which acts as an online collaboration mechanism. It has a capability of grabbing and creating a transcript of all the actions that were done during a drill or during a disaster, which can be analyzed later to study where their gaps are. As a testament to our technology, we have 100+ SANOVI marquee customers. Most of them are banks. In fact, we have about 22 banks in India as our customer. Okay. To summarize the benefits of SANOVI, we have a customer use case with HDFC Bank, where HDFC has been on the forefront of disaster recovery readiness for the last 3-4 years, and they invested in our tool about 7 years ago, and some of the benefits that they saw is over 85% reduction in application failover time. So in case an application failed in the data center, they were able to quickly switch over to disaster recovery side by reducing the time RTO by about 85%. 100% increase in frequency in DR drills. They were able to increase the capability to test their DR. Flexible testing and recovery options. They can test applications as an individual or application as a whole with all the interdependent layers. 75% reduction in DR drill preparation time. If they had to do a DR drill, they were spending about 2 week work man days just to prepare for the drill. Now they do it in within 4 hours. Real-time alerts on RPO, RTO, deviations of critical application, and they started with about 30 servers. They are up to about 800 servers now. And from a disaster recovery management staff perspective, it's still the same number of teams. Some of the other banks which are using our product are ICICI, Indian Overseas Corporation, Federal, Karur Vysya, Indian Overseas Bank is one of them. Okay. This is basically what I have from a technology perspective in a bank. You can go to our site where you can actually see customers speak. You have some of our customers which have gone on video to talk about the benefits that have.